Good morning, everyone. Welcome and thank you for being part of WorkSafe's webinar, Shop No Further, Solutions, Tools and Practical Advice for Preventing Mental Injury in Retail. My name is Claire Nivrovic and I'm the Director of Prevention Strategy at WorkSafe Victoria, and I'll be your host this morning. While our program of sessions is virtual, we have the same aims that we always do for Health and Safety Month, which is to keep you informed. This year, our focus is navigating through COVID-19. Our session today involves me and three expert industry speakers. Gary Terrell is the Chief Operating Officer of the Australian Retailers Association, also known as the ARA. Good morning, Gary.
Morning, Claire.
Mark Ostago is the General Manager and Principal Psychologist at the Communicore Group. Hi, Mark.
Morning, Claire. It's great to be here.
And our third panellist is Ash Braybrook, Health and Safety Officer at the Shop Distributive and Allied Employees Association, the SDA, the Victorian branch. Welcome, Ash.
Morning, Claire. Thank you.
We've structured this session as a conversation between me and our three speakers who are all working to deliver innovative solutions in mental health promotion and prevention. This includes WorkSafe's Work Well Learning Networks, a program that brings together employers to identify and respond to mental health risks within their industry. There will be time for questions at the end. Remember, if there's something that you need to discuss urgently with WorkSafe, please do get in touch via our advisory line or our emergency line. A few housekeeping matters before we get started. If you'd like to join the conversation about Health and Safety Month on social media, please use the hashtag HSMonth. And remember, we will talk about various resources throughout the session today. We will make those available on our website after the session has concluded. So let's begin. The $325 billion retail sector is our largest private sector employer, employing an estimated 1.2 million Australians. That's 1 in 10 Australian workers in the industry. Some of them have been busier than ever on the front line, and others have been impacted by store closures and job losses. Through the retail response to COVID-19, we've learned just how entwined mental and physical health are, and how now more than ever, workplace mental health is crucial for retail employers and their workers. Gary, the Victorian retail industry has been hit quite hard by store closures, social distancing restrictions, and changing legislation. Can you tell us about the unique impact of COVID-19 to the retail sector and impacts on employers and business owners?
Thanks, Claire. Unfortunately, there have been winners and losers in the retail sector. Some retailers are performing very well due to their national store networks and sale of wanted or essential products that have been in high demand during the lockdown period, which of course is ongoing. At the ARA, we have members ranging from very small to very large retailers. And over the last 6 months, incredible changes across the industry, and our members have had to continually adjust their business models to ensure they are meeting their COVID safety requirements and still being able to trade, of course. Overall, retailers across Victoria have been incredible in their ability to adapt to rapidly changing COVID safety requirements like social distancing and changing safety regulations. And this will continue to be really important as we lead into the upcoming peak Christmas trade and New Year sales to ensure that the industry does not risk further shutdowns. And if I could just call out the smaller retailers, they have experienced great difficulties in trying to survive through the lockdowns, and they will need great support from the government to be able to reopen their stores and trade into the future. Even with the expected reopening of retail in Melbourne this week, the future is still uncertain for many retailers. Claire.
Thanks, Gary. It's been such a turbulent time, and we really do hope that retailers can open up soon. Mark, as a psychologist specialising in workplace mental health, can you tell us why mental health of retail workers is so important right now, and why it's also important for employers to offer the right support?
Thanks very much, Claire. I think, at the moment, it's an incredibly challenging environment, and it's going to have or has the potential to have a significant impact on mental health in the workplace. From an employee perspective, I guess, when we look at the current environment in terms of, consistent uncertainty and unpredictability, it can create a sense of fear for individuals. I mean, the human brain craves that certainty and predictability to feel safe. And at the moment, with so much change, that just isn't there. For examples, there's been changes in job roles, there's been changes, ever-changing restrictions, and uncertainty around that future and financial stability for a lot of employees. And I think from an employer perspective, there are a number of work-related factors that need to be considered. And I might just explain quickly what a work-related factor is. So I guess it's those things within the nature of work that have the potential to impact negatively on employee mental health if left unmanaged. But conversely, if we actually manage them and promote them, can have the ability to promote positive mental health within the workplace. And so during the current climate, we're seeing a number of those work-related factors impacted. So for example, occupational violence and aggression and aggressive customer incidents, where we're seeing anecdotally an increase in severity and frequency of those incidents. And also in terms of job demands, where we're seeing, for some retailers and employers, increased job demands and real busy peak periods that are consistent and sustained. And for some, it's the reverse, where we're seeing those decreased job demands. And I also think it's the nature of change within the job demands and the additional roles that we're taking on within that space, for example, infection control. So I think, from an employer perspective, there are a number of challenges that have the potential to negatively impact on employee mental health at the moment in the retail space.
Thanks, Mark. And Ash, from a union perspective, what have been the unique needs for workers who've been on the front line during the pandemic?
Thanks, Claire. Well, I agree with Mark that unpredictability has been a massive factor for workers at the moment. And as Gary suggested, there is this duality in the retail industry. We have one set of employees that are just out of work, unsure when they're coming back, and another set that are in the workplace. I'm not sure what day-to-day what that's going to look like. You've got panic buying. Some days they're flat out. Some days there's no one in the shops. You've also got the infection control piece where they're not sure how well things are being cleaned. And I think the biggest factor for workers has been communication and sometimes lack thereof. And since this panel is about practical tips, I'd say my practical tips for employers is better communication. Quite often they're doing the right things, but that communication isn't necessarily happening on the granular individual level. And my point would be to have those conversations as conversations rather than just documents sent to people, but real one-on-one conversations about what they are doing to protect them and where they can have conversations if they're worried. The other part would be there's been, as Mark suggested, increase in customer abuse and violence. And that's looked like cases of people being spat on and coughed on directly. Yeah, that's sort of where it's at for workers. Thanks, Claire.
Thanks, Ash. It's so important to see how those actions and supports from employers that Mark was talking about can actually help to mitigate those mental health risks that are being experienced by our retail workers. I want to go on now and have a talk about the Workwell learning networks that we mentioned in the intro. So these were established by WorkSafe to bring workplaces and experts together to share ideas and knowledge and provide advice and support to workplaces so that they can implement initiatives to create safe and mentally healthy environments. Gary and Mark, you're both learning network chairs, which means that you're bringing organisations together to create change. I'd really like to hear from both of you about the work that you're doing in that space and what you're learning. Gary, perhaps we can start with you.
Thanks, Claire. The ARA made its application to be a Workwell Learning Network Chair late last year because the aim of the program has been to build and maintain mentally healthy workplaces in Victoria. The ARA Retail Learning Network project scope includes identifying, with the aid of a survey, work-related factors of priority concern to frontline workers. Then, through the co-design phase led by subject matter experts, create interventions suitable for implementation and review in the workplace to ultimately reduce claims through a positive change in the mental well-being of the staff. The ARA consortium is led by a steering committee made up of our members, oversees the program from the distribution of the baseline survey through to the implementation of workplace intervention solutions to address and maintain mental health concerns in the workplace. Over the past 10 months, we've had a strong response across a number of our retailers wanting to take part in the program via the completion of the survey. Delays due to both COVID lockdown and it has meant a realignment of the stages for our learning network. So survey results and engagement from a broader number of retailers leading into the co-design phase means we're in a strong position to identify and prioritise work-related factors impacting our retailers now that are different to when we began. Both our subject matter experts and academic partners are ready to assist in the facilitation of those interventions and how we implement them over the next 2 to 4 months. We expect the intervention outcomes will be able to assist and support with all levels of training catering for frontline teams, middle and senior management. Because of COVID-19, we've had to reprioritise our focus somewhat, with training for managing and aggression become a priority for our members and as part of this project. Claire.
Thanks for that, Gary. And I can really hear through that, this was something that kicked off pre-COVID, and it's been that requirement to really take a look at what was originally planned and think about adapting that for the circumstances. What about you, Mark? What's happening with the learning network that you're chairing?
Yeah, thanks, Claire. And look, like Gary, I think all the learning networks have had similar challenges in terms of it all being planned pre-COVID. At Communicorp, we're incredibly privileged to be collaborating with Australia Post and specifically licensee post officers and parcel delivery drivers in Victoria to look at and support, creating a positive mental health and thriving workplaces. Similar to Gary, we were about to launch our survey a couple of weeks after COVID hit. So we hit the big pause button and kind of came together as a group and said, well, how do we best support these workplaces during this time? And so we decided to look at the work-related factors and identify a number of them that we could make resources for to help support both the employers and employees in those workplaces. And so we released a number of 5 short videos for people to digest, and also a number of tip sheets with, practical tips and strategies that can be implemented within the workplace to address those work-related factors. So some of those examples, for example, were managing difficult customer interactions, managing change, looking at high and low job demands, and remote and isolated work. And if we take the high job demands, for example, what we were looking at there were some of the practical tips around, well, can we apply or change the nature of the work that we're doing to reduce those job demands through flexible work practices, scheduling, duties and the like. But we also recognise that, at times it's not possible to change the nature of the work. So how do we then better manage or cope with that work through individual resources? And so we provided a number of practical self-care strategies that can be done during work hours to help maintain and sustain that period of work if required. Another example was the OVA and the managing challenging customer interactions piece.
Great, and that's something that's actually come up, not only with yourself in your comments earlier, but also Ash and Gary have mentioned occupational violence and aggression as being, quite a key risk that's needing to be managed within retail at the moment, and obviously pre-COVID as well. What can employers do to mitigate that risk of occupational violence and aggression in retail?
Yeah, it's a great question, Claire. And I think from my perspective, it's about taking a systemic approach to addressing the risk. So breaking it down and looking at, well, what can we actually do pre-incident? So are there triggers that we can remove or alter within the workplace to minimise the triggering of the behaviour? Looking at our environmental checklists to making sure that the environment is safe, and things like chairs or staplers are removed, and things like that, or tied down so that they can't be used as objects to be thrown at people and the like. So taking that real preventative approach and having clear policy and strategy around what that looks like within the workplace. To during the incident, ensuring that staff and managers have the appropriate skills to de-escalate the situation if it does occur. And also, the recognition that doesn't always work. So what are our appropriate exit strategies to maintain both, my own safety in those environments, but also the safety of those around us? And finally, I think post-incident, it's around, how do we support staff who've been exposed to those incidents, and how do we report and record those incidents as well, so we can start to get a better picture of where the challenges lie. Are there particular hotspots? Are there particular times of day and the like? But at the end of the day, it's a really complex challenge, and to really take a true preventative approach, I think we need to start to look at how do we actually shift customer behaviour. And I think that's where Ash and the SDA are doing some great work in terms of trying to shift that behaviour.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And Ash, we will go to you. I'm really interested to hear what the union has been doing by way of supporting the sector on this issue.
Well, thanks, Claire, and thanks, Mark, for that. Well, anyone that's worked in retail will know that customer abuse and violence is a really real and long-standing issue. We knew that, but we launched some research a few years ago. We asked over 6,000 retail and fast food workers about their experiences, and over 85% of them said they had experienced customer abuse and violence in the workplace. Taking into account how many of those do work in non-front-facing roles, those are massive numbers. So from there, we launched our No One Deserves a Serve campaign, which focused on TV, radio, digital, and billboards. And that was about getting that conversation out there and having those conversations and starting that in the public perception. I believe we do have the first No One Deserves a Serve ad, which is my favorite one. Could we cue that up, please?
We lived 1,000 years, 1,000 times, 1,000 lives before I die, 1,000 ways, 1,000 times to look into your eyes.
Authorised M. Donovan, SDA Victoria South Bank.
And just staying with you, Ash, can you talk to us about how that campaign is working?
Yeah, sure can. So since COVID, we have discussed that there's been an increase in customer abuse and violence, which isn't good. However, what that has done is that's found a bunch of retailers signing on to the campaign where previously they hadn't. Prior to COVID, the ARA had signed on and been working with us around the No One Deserves a Serve campaign and customer abuse and violence. We've been working on multi-level training for all levels of management and workers to try and reduce incidents. But we've seen other retailers come on board. We've got some badges that people can wear just to get that message out there, including under badges that go under the normal name badges to humanise the workers. Stuff like the Perspex screens that have gone up. As a response to COVID, we've actually found that physical barrier has helped in reducing instances of customer abuse and violence. We've also got an industry statement that retailers can sign on just to say that they've got a zero tolerance approach and we can help assist them with setting all that up. And we're working with the industry on ways to prevent and respond to customer abuse and violence incidents, including reporting. But overall, we've just found a greater level of conversation about OVA. That includes, for example, my mother, who's not involved in the industry or workplace industrial stuff at all, has been saying, hey, I've seen these ads and it's made me rethink the way I shop. So that's been great. We've seen better conversation going as well.
Thanks. That's great to hear, Ash. And I think, that's such a great example of a fantastic campaign with lots of support from the industry, supporting our retail workers. Terrific. So we're going to just conclude the question part here with a further question for each of you before we move on to the audience questions. And what we're really focusing on here is what retailers can do to change things. So, what are you advising to the people you're working with now and into the future? Mark, can you talk about the key for retailers?
Yeah, absolutely, Claire. I think, from a retailer perspective, the key is taking a systems-based approach to mental health in the workplace. And what I mean by that is having a balance of primary, secondary, and tertiary interventions in place. So those are the things that we can do to prevent mental ill health. Those are the things that we can do to ensure that early identification and intervention occurs in the workplace. And finally, from that tertiary perspective, ensuring that we have the appropriate support mechanisms in place for the staff that may be exposed to mental ill health. And I think it's not just about the prevention of mental ill health, but also about the promotion of positive mental health. What can we do to start to create a culture of thriving and flourishing within the workplace? And for me, it comes back to kind of, taking that step back, looking at what the potential risks are, and then starting to address them through that balanced approach.
Thanks, Mark. And Gary, you spoke about training earlier and the need to prioritise that. Just interested in your comments on the importance of training.
Yes, Claire, training is vital from our point of view. We need to upskill frontline and middle management and upper management staff in addressing occupational violence and what can mitigate it. The ARA has been an active participant during the COVID period with providing infection control training to retail staff, and we'll be soon releasing a training program that will focus on training for frontline staff and how to de-escalate customer abuse and harassment. As discussed previously, the ARA is currently developing this nationally accredited training skill set that addresses these occupational violence and aggression issues in the workplace. We expect to commence this training later in the year and to help frontline staff understand how they can implement techniques to de-escalate these issues, as well as build resilience in the workplace and understanding of their problems. Claire.
Thanks for that, Gary. And Ash, what final words do you have for retail workers who experience bad behaviour?
Thanks, Claire. My final word would be report incidences. If a roof tile fell down next to you, you would report that as a physical near miss. Mental health hazards should be reported in the same way. So whether it's something that does hurt you mentally or something that could hurt you mentally, use your company's reporting procedures to report that so that there is a proper record of this happening. I feel it's chronically underreported, and that's the biggest thing you can do to help push this tide forward.
Thanks for that, Ash. That's great advice. We have covered a lot of info so far today, and one of the things that you've heard spoken about is the work-related factors, those things that are about the nature of work that can impact positively or negatively on people's mental health and well-being. I want to assure everyone that we have a great resource available which gives you a whole lot of information about those work-related factors and the actions that can be taken to create mentally healthy workplaces. They're freely available through the WorkWell Toolkit. We're just going to share a brief video now before we get on to our audience questions about the WorkWell Toolkit.
Meet WorkSafe's WorkWell Toolkit, a tailored free online resource helping employers to create mentally healthy workplaces. Sign up and explore your custom dashboard with case studies, videos, and other useful resources that you can begin to action straight away with your team. Use a step-by-step approach and track each action. Then share the progress with your colleagues. The topics include role clarity, leadership, change management, and so many more. Creating a safe and mentally healthy workplace is good for your employees and your business. Discover the WorkWell Toolkit today.
So hopefully that gave everyone a great idea of how easy the toolkit is to use in your workplace, and would really encourage everyone to jump on and have a go at that. I'd also like to thank our panel for the insights that you've shared so far. We've got some questions coming through now in our chat box, so we'll start taking a look at those. I'd like to start with a question perhaps for you, Ash. This is about health and safety representatives. We at WorkSafe really love health and safety representatives in workplaces. They play such an important role. The question here is that employers are often sidelining HSRs and employees on OH&S matters. What advice do you give to help HSRs and employers to work together?
Well, I would ask them to have a look at the HSR training they did and use the ACE communication skills that are embedded with that. And I guess follow their processes, right? Follow the processes for communication. And if that communication and consultation isn't happening, well, that's a breach of the OHS Act. If you're a member of the SDA, you have us, and as the health and safety officer, part of my role is helping HSRs through that process, so you can contact us. WorkSafe also have HSR consultants that can work with you through those processes. And at the end of the day, if the company is breaching the OHS Act, there's the ability to put a pin on it once you've done your proper part in consultation. They do have a duty to do that consultation and have that communication there.
Great, thanks Ash, some really good advice there, and just reiterating that you can certainly come to WorkSafe and ask any questions about that. This is an interesting one, perhaps that Mark, you might want to comment on. There's a viewer who operates op shops with volunteer staff. What effect does background music have in creating a positive outlook for staff and customers?
Yeah, Claire, that's a really challenging question. I think, from the research perspective, there is some evidence to suggest that listening to music can have a positive impact on mood and also a positive impact on productivity within the workplace. But I think it's important to look at, well, what are some of the challenges with that research as well? And I think it comes down to the fact that the type of music can impact productivity. And for some staff members, it's actually like multitasking or task switching. Especially if it's quite popular music and with a lot of lyrics. So, going from the music to the work and back again, and can actually start to decrease productivity. And then I think that the final piece, which is around, well, what is good music? And that's a very personal and subjective thing. And so I think, music within the workplace, just like potentially the room temperature, can be a source of interpersonal conflict at times within workplaces. So if we're looking at music within workplaces, I guess it would be I'd suggest throwing it over to the team and asking them to see if there's a consensus that can be reached on whether it's a positive or a negative.
Thank you for that, Mark. Gary, we might come to you on this next question. It's talking about, the uncertainty and the roller coaster that the sector has had to ride with the government announcements, around determining how or how not stores can operate. What are some of the ways that the retail sector can manage that level of uncertainty and change? What are you advising your members?
Claire, I think for our members, that's a very difficult question. We've had a lot of uncertainty, but I think the best advice I can give is that WorkSafe and the ARA have continually provided relevant and current information, and that information covers all the operational and staffing requirements within their stores and also outside of their stores within the shopping centre environments they operate within. But it's been a difficult time because and so it's difficult to answer that question because of the constant changes and uncertainty about reopening.
You mentioned there that you've been doing a lot of work to, try and provide information to your members, etc. There's a question here about how does someone get connected with the ARA?
The ARA is a membership organisation, so our members actually own the organisation. So for somebody that's not a member of the ARA, it's very simple. They can contact our membership team and become a member. If somebody's a single store retailer, the cost of the membership is very low, and there's a lot of value there that the members can get, particularly in an environment like this. Outside of that, we're publishing information as well. So I'd say to all those out there looking for support, the ARA really is the one-stop shop in that regard.
Thank you for that, Gary. And perhaps again, I'll direct this one to you first, and then we might go to our other panellists as well, because I'm sure this is a significant issue on a lot of people's minds. It's around how large shopping centres might manage the lead up to the busy Christmas period. Really, what some of the strategies are going to be around things like social distancing during those heavy sales times, and how that might be handled, whether it might be something like what we've seen with some of the things used for grocery shopping. Can you comment on that, Gary?
I think we've got to look at it in two ways. It's what needs to happen within the store in terms of creating a bubble or bubbles within that store to be able to mitigate risk, and all of the things that we know about in terms of social distancing, cleanliness, and so forth. I think the really big challenge is going to be in the shopping centres, particularly the very large shopping centres. And some of the things that I think that they will have to look at very seriously will be around trading hours. There's been no real discussion at this point in time, but we are running into a Christmas trading and New Year period with a much shorter timeline, which is going to make it incredibly difficult. And I think what the shopping centres are really looking at doing is how they manage queuing. That's going to be a big issue, and looking at what they can do with trading hours. over and above that, I think it's just continuing all the things that we've been doing throughout the COVID period. But it is going to be challenging. There's no doubt about that.
Thanks, Gary. And Ash, I'm interested in your comments about that from the perspective of your members.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. I think Gary's right that it is going to be a big challenge to look at. And maybe I can get it linked up at the end. The SDA has put together a 10-point shopping centre plan for the return to retail opening up, specifically around this sort of stuff. So one of the parts is looking, without memorising all 10 points off the top of my head, one of the points is looking at increased police presence, understanding that stuff like social distancing and mask wearing isn't the job of retail workers to enforce. So we need police out there to enforce that. Things like having hand sanitizer at the entrance to shopping centres, not just shops, and having those numbers controlled as they're entering the shopping centre. And I guess reminding shopping centre owners that they have duty under the OHS Act too to provide a safe and healthy workplace to everyone that enters there. But I probably the 10-point plan is probably the best way to have a look at that. That's how we've put our thoughts together. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Ash. And Mark, from your point of view, I'm just really interested in your comments. Getting back to earlier, you mentioned that need for that systems approach to really thinking about, I guess, the mental health risks that will come about from, our retail workers in that difficult environment that we can anticipate opening up before Christmas. What are your thoughts there around ensuring those systems are in place?
Yeah, it's a really, I guess, challenging environment and challenging question. And I think if we can kind of come back and maybe make some hypotheses around what some of those risks are going to be to mental health. And I think, those types of environments are going to drive probably quite a bit of, health anxiety around what it's going to be to be working in those environments. And so from a mitigation perspective, how do we then start to address that? And I think that's through, consistent and clear communication around what's being done. Absolutely, all the infection control methods are absolutely necessary, but are we actually talking through them, promoting them, training our staff on them, orientating and onboarding people appropriately within the workplace to those practices, and kind of starting to look at it from that kind of communication and training perspective. And then also I think it's about, well, how do we provide support to the employees during this time? It is going to be challenging. So what can we do to kind of consistently and regularly check in with them to see how they are going and apply a little bit of that early intervention process to it. And finally, I think, the other challenge that I see here is, things like queuing and restricted movements, those types of activities are going to have an impact on the shopper. And so how do we start to try to address some of those challenges so that we're minimising the risk of aggressive customer incidents, and whether that's through things like queue walkers, signage, communication, setting those clear expectations with shoppers and the like, so that we can start to minimise that risk as well. But there's probably 101 different things that we could go into, but those probably would be the priority areas for consideration, Claire.
That's great. Thanks, Mark. And you beautifully preempted another question there, which was around, things can be done to assist the anxiety within the customers as well. And I think your last comments there really went to that issue. So thank you for that. Ash, coming back to you, we've had a question about that concept of humanising workers. Can you talk a little bit more about that in the context of, retail and what that can do to, I guess, support workers within the sector?
Yeah, thanks, Claire. I'm happy to talk about it. So I guess I'll go into more detail about what the under badges do. So they basically say no one deserves a serve, and then they have a little message next to it identifying the person. So it says stuff like I'm a mother, or I'm a father, or I'm someone's child, things like that, to help them understand this person is a person that's loved by people, that has a life outside of just standing behind a register, scanning your bananas or whatever. And it's about that, having you understand that the person you're seeing and you're putting your aggression to isn't just some person that exists solely in that situation, that it is a person that has real life interactions and has a whole rich life outside of your interactions, and that what you say to them and how you act to them will have a further impact. And I think that's really important, because we find that you're just walking through it and it's a way to express how you're feeling, and people don't realise what impact that's going to have greater. So we found that works really well. and also making people feel empowered in their conversations as workers. Yeah.
Great, thank you. That's really interesting. I think that concept of, the person behind the worker is really a good one. Gary, we've got a question here about, I guess, the role of retailers for enforcing customer COVID requirements. So we did speak a little bit about this earlier, the concept of mask wearing or whatever it may be by the customer, and that can obviously, be a very difficult thing within a retail context and add stress to employees. I'm really interested what conversations there might have been between industry and government or regulators about that issue.
There's been significant discussion going on all the way through with how we actually manage these issues of COVID, and particularly with the people. I think we've upgraded our advice through our reopening guidelines at least 4 to 5 times. So there's been ongoing discussion with our members and with the state government and with other key stakeholders as well. So I think that, that it's been a very difficult period of time to try and navigate through, but I do genuinely think that the retailers have been able to manage a very difficult situation with both the, trying to understand when they're going to reopen their stores, how they'll reopen their stores, how they'll manage their teams. But certainly there's been significant consultation all the way through with government and other key stakeholders.
Thanks, Gary. And perhaps, Ash, did you want to comment on that from the perspective of the workers around, I guess, that tension of having to interact with customers who may not be following those requirements?
Yeah, there's been a lot of worry for workers there around how do we approach that. Where does that duty fall around them asking people to wear those? And we saw pretty early on, once the masks happened, with the Bunnings Karen and how people had to interact with that. So there's been a lot of worry and tension around that. So we've been trying to communicate with retailers to put up signage and really clear signage to set those expectations. But yeah, that has been a worry about how much that needs to be enforced by retail workers and where those lines fall. Yeah.
Terrific, thank you. And Mark, we've got a really interesting one here for you, which is sort of probably the million-dollar question in many ways. How does a retailer best start the process of changing the way I support my workers' mental health?
Yeah, that is the million-dollar question, Claire. And I guess it's going to be different for each retailer, and it'll be dependent on, I guess, the level of maturity of where the retailer is in terms of that journey. I guess from my perspective, the first thing would be to look at, well, what's currently going on within within that retailer. Have a look at, what are we currently doing to best support mental health? If it's nothing, then let's start looking at, well, what are some of the basics? And let's start to look at what are the work-related factors that are most likely to impact on mental health, and starting, with those work-related factors as a priority. And I think the WorkWell toolkit that you promoted earlier is a great resource to start with. And I think there are a number of other resources out there for employers that they can start to look at. There's some great work being done in the mentally healthy workplace space to kind of access and free resources as well to kind of start to look at where to best start that journey.
And yeah, I would absolutely reiterate that the WorkWell toolkit is very much set up that way around, how do I take the first step no matter where I'm at, or how do I take the next step if I've been on this journey for a while. So it's a great resource. And this will perhaps be our last question. And Mark, I'll just stay with you on this one, because it is one of those tricky ones as well. And it's really around how you can create a mentally healthy workplace while thinking about the responsibility for personal mental health outside of the work environment, and what's a good way to think about that as an employer.
Yeah, I think from the employer perspective, it's recognising that everyone's going to have things that go on outside of the workplace as well. And for me, it's about how do we best support bringing your whole self to work. And I think if we can create a culture of psychological safety within the workplace where it's okay to stick your hand up, and that might be, sticking your hand up for help on the job, or it might be sticking your hand up and saying, look, I'm really struggling at the moment and I need some support. And so I think if we can create that culture and that psychological safety within the workplace, then we're going to be best able to support employees who may have, mental ill health concerns outside of the workplace. And I think if we can take that approach, then we're going to, get the best out of people as well. There's really clear research around the fact that supportive leadership and supportive work environments and psychological safety are going to create, a better workplace culture and better return on investment and productivity and all those other things that, we want from a workplace as well.
Terrific. Thanks for that, Mark. And look, I'd really like to thank all three of you for your comments and answers to our viewer questions today. I'd just like to see from each of you any final brief messages for our viewers today. Perhaps, Gary, if we start with you.
Sure. Thank you, Claire. From the ARA's point of view, I think the message we've got is there is so much support out there for the retailers in terms of managing this process. So from the ARA's point of view, we've been very active in providing all of our members with the most current advice via weekly communications. We've developed up COVID updates. We've got regular operational guidelines, and we're delivering webinars and so forth. So I think there's a lot of good resource available for retailers out there. And I suppose the final comment I would make is hopefully the retailers in Melbourne will be able to open soon and can retail for Christmas in a safe and viable way without any further restrictions.
Thanks very much, Gary. And Mark, over to you for any final comments.
Yeah, Claire, I think times are tough. It's challenging at the moment. There is a lot of change and there are a lot of stressors. And I guess, it's this idea that it's okay not to be okay. And how do we best support each other through this journey, and how do we come together within the industry to support each other? And if we can do that, then I think it's going to have a pretty significant impact on mental health.
Terrific. And Ash, any final comments from you?
Thanks, Claire. Well, I'll reiterate my earlier point of report these incidences. From a statistical standpoint, if they're not properly reported through the company systems, they never happened, and we just don't have that data to show, hey, this is what's going on. So report every incident.
Terrific. Thanks very much. We've really heard some great information today just about the importance in retail workplaces to have those systems of work in place to ensure we've got the mental health of our employees protected, and that as far as practicable, we've got strategies in place to have workplaces that are free from psychosocial risks. Really, there's been no time like this for this issue around physical and mental health of retail employers to be so important. It's such a major group of workers within our industry in Victoria. Thank you so much to our speakers for your input today, and for our audience for your interest as well. And shortly on screen, we'll pop a list of some of the key resources that we mentioned and contacts in the session today. If you've got any questions about any of those things, please do get in touch. Thank you so much for tuning in today, and enjoy the rest of your day.